All right, here we go. All right, so I'm just going to read this again here. An animal must defend itself from the many dangerous pathogens it may encounter. Two major kinds of defenses, innate and acquired immunity. So, innate immunity is present before any exposure to pathogens. You're born with it. It's present at the time of birth. It involves non-specific responses to pathogens. So it's non-specific, so it can fight against any type of pathogen. Consists of external barriers plus internal cellular and chemical defenses. So these internal defenses are macrophages and other phagocytic cells. So these non-specific responses, you're born with ways to combat foreign things that enter your body. So we have these external barriers. Your skin is the main one, your external barrier. We'll talk about some things with your skin. You have mucus in your openings from the skin to the internal body that help to trap microbes and so on. So you have these external barriers, but a lot of things get past those external barriers. So we have some internal defenses as well. And so cells can work, so the cellular defenses are cells attacking your pathogens, or some of our cells can release chemicals that also can defend us. So these cells involve macrophages and phagocytic cells. Phagocytic sounds an awful lot like a word we talked about before, which is phagocytosis. Does that ring a bell? Phagocytosis is a type of endocytosis where here you have your cell and you have a particle on the outside of the cell, and the cell membrane engulfs it kind of indents around it and then continues to pinch off until you get the particle inside. This is how some unicellular organisms eat. They can get their food that way. In our body, the phagocytic cells in part of our immune system will engulf and destroy pathogens this way. So they will engulf them. And so this is an actual picture of a white blood cell. This is in blue, and this is the bacteria engulfing. All right, the part of the cell membrane is surrounding it. So that's innate immunity. Then we have acquired immunity, or adaptive immunity it's called. This is immunity that we acquire, hence the name. Develops after exposure to agents such as microbes, toxins, and other foreign substances, like I said, fungus and so on, viruses. Involves a very specific response to the pathogen. Recognition is by white blood cells called lymphocytes. Some lymphocytes produce antibodies. You probably have heard of antibodies before. Others destroy infected cells or cancer cells or other foreign tissue. So we'll talk about how the foreign tissue later on when we get to and talk specifically about the different types of lymphocytes. I'll talk a little bit about like tissue transplants and so on, and how matching tissue transplants, and because what will happen is your lymphocytes will destroy foreign tissue. So how do you get an organ transplant and so on, and what is matching? Finding a match for an organ, what does that mean? All right, so we'll look at that. So that's what it means by foreign tissue. The lymphocytes, the two main types of lymphocytes I'm just going to put here are B cells and T cells. And these are part of your specific immunity. So what happens is that you're born with this innate immunity that can fight off some things. But then this acquired immunity you get throughout your lifetime. So what happens is the very first time you come into contact with a pathogen, your body, your immune system, will build cells that will attack that particular type of pathogen. So that and it remembers that. So then the next time you come in contact with that pathogen, you act and attack it at a much quicker rate than the first time. No. This is something that you get through exposure. All right, so you have to be exposed to something. So the innate immunity is those types of defenses, but this is something that individual people have to come into contact with their particular lifetime. All right, so we'll talk more about that later. So this shows you the results, or the kind of the relationship between innate and acquired immunity, and we're kind of going to go through each one of these. So here's your pathogen. So your first line of defenses is the innate immunity. This is more rapid, and it says it responds to a broad range of microbes, so it's not very specific. And so you first have your external defenses. So we're going to look at your skin, your mucous membranes, and secretions. And that's your first line of defense, but sometimes that microbe will get past that external defenses, and so your second line of defense is still part of the innate immunity. We'll talk about these phagocytic cells that engulf these foreign particles, and we'll look at these other three things: antimicrobial proteins, inflammatory response, and natural killer cells. All of these help defend against that foreign pathogen. And then for us, we have the acquired immunity that now once you have this pathogen getting past all of these defenses, we have two different responses: humoral response that produces antibodies, and we'll talk about what that means, and the cell-mediated response. So the acquired immunity is slower response because, especially that first time that you ever come into contact with that pathogen, but the second time you come into contact with the pathogen, your response is much faster as a result of that. So today we're going to look at innate immunity, and tomorrow we'll start acquired immunity. So let's look at this innate immunity. So there's the external and internal defenses that are part of innate immunity. So a pathogen that breaks through external defenses encounters innate cellular and chemical mechanisms that will hopefully impede its attack. So what are these external defenses that a pathogen has to break through to get into your body? The first thing is your skin and mucous membranes. All right, these guys are physical barriers to the entry of microorganisms and viruses. Mucous membrane cells, as it sounds, produces mucus. A viscous, it's kind of thicker fluid that traps microbes and other particles. An example of where we might find this is in the trachea. Trachea is your windpipe. Ciliated epithelial cells sweep mucus and any entrapped microbes upward, preventing microbes from entering the lungs. So you have fluid, a lot of your openings of your body, so like your nasal passage in your mouth are huge with that. And so like if you think about your nasal passage, your whole nasal passage is lined with mucus all the way down and to the back of your throat, and then down here you have two tubes. You have your esophagus that leads to your stomach. That's part of your digestive system. So that's where when you swallow, it goes down your esophagus and goes to your stomach. Then you have the trachea, which is otherwise known as your windpipe. Your trachea is when you breathe, the air goes down your trachea into your lungs. So your air is not going to your stomach, and your stomach is not, or your food is not going to your lungs. And so what happens is that when you breathe in through your nose, you're breathing to bring in oxygen, right? And so that's why you're inhaling. But what you're inhaling is way more things than just oxygen. You're breathing in all the other gases in the air, but you're also breathing in anything that's floating around in the air. So what else things could be floating around in the air? Pollen, bacteria and viruses from people, coughing next to you and stuff like that, and that enters into the air. People's skin cells are constantly flaking off. Your skin cells are skin cells floating around, so you're probably breathing in your neighbor's skin cells as we speak, which is really kind of gross. All right, but all of that stuff is floating around in the air. I have a gross skin cells story here real quick. It's kind of off topic, but it always reminds me of this. When I was in high school, my older cousin, he was like 18 or 19, for a summer job, he was a door-to-door vacuum salesman. And so he asked my mom to come over and practice this little sales speech, So I was like, sure, come on over. And he brought with his vacuum, and his vacuum was, was for selling that vacuum. And so they had, instead of when it sucked in the material, instead of it going into the bag, it went off to the side into this like clear plastic little container, and they had like black felt on it so that you could easily see all the stuff it sucked up, and how great the vacuum was and all that kind of thing. And part of his thing was he asked my mom, can I vacuum your mattress? I said, sure, come on over, and like he pulled the sheets back in the mattress pad, and he stuck the vacuum up there and vacuumed, and I mean, immediately that container was not black anymore, the felt, it was all white and had this thick layer of white on it. It was all the dead skin cells that come off while you're sleeping. They accumulate. They're small, they can get through the pores of your sheets and stuff like that, and they accumulate actually in your mattress. And so you lose lots of skin cells. So it was really enlightening. And so now every now and then, I remember that. It obviously grossed me out enough, I still remember this very clearly. So now every now and then, I look like a crazy woman alone on my mattress, vacuuming my mattress because it's broke. I also put another whole spin and kind of ruined hotels for me, because I don't think about all the like stuff in the mattress. Yes. So anyway, that's behind it. So you're losing skin cells all the time, and we're breathing them in. You don't want all of this other stuff that's in the air to get down to your lungs. Hence the mucus. And so, so here we have, if this is your trachea, and so this is your mouth or nose. You can breathe through your mouth too. And so here's your nose. You have cells that line your trachea. These cells are ciliated, but they're only ciliated on one side. So the cilia is in the inside of your trachea here, like this. And so those are cilia all along here, cilia. Cilia can be used for unicellular organisms to actually move. So you can have little protists that live in fresh water, and they have little cilia to help them move. These cells are not moving. These cells stay part of your trachea, but the cilia does move. And so let's look at what it moves. So also embedded in here, you have special cells that aren't ciliated, but their job is to secrete mucus. And so they secrete a layer of mucus, and this layer of mucus is surrounding your windpipe. So it's like a tube, so this is going around circularly. And so what happens is, when you breathe in your air and all of the bacteria and viruses and things like that, they go into your nose and where there's mucus, so they can stick there. And then they have to round some curves, and so then they can stick the mucus there. And then they get down to the trachea, which is also lined the whole way with this mucus that's sticky. And so all of this stuff sticks to your mucus. So you have all this stuff stuck to your mucus, so that by the time your air gets down to your lungs, it's just air. It's just air molecules, and you don't get all that stuff in your lungs. So what do we do with this? In comes the cilia. So the cilia lining your trachea sweep up that mucus, and with it, all of that stuff trapped into your mucus.
Hi, this is Christine.
Oh, but he's not here.
He's not here today.
And he won't be. He told me he's not going to be here for the rest of the week because he's in a mime thing.
Okay.
So I don't want to keep it.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Okay. So so they're bringing it up, the mucus up with all of this bacteria and viruses and stuff stuck to it. It comes to the back of your throat, where what you do is you swallow it, and it goes down your esophagus and through your digestive system, and we get rid of it that way. So all the time, when like throughout the day you're swallowing, you think you're just swallowing the saliva. It's also you're bringing up that mucus in the back of your throat and swallowing it as well. All right. And so that's an example. That's what this is about. An example of your body getting rid of some of that bacteria and viruses, these pathogens, so they don't get into your lungs and into your body and so on. So that's a part of your external defenses. And this is some cilia, some ciliated cells. All right. Also, we have skin secretions. So secretions of the skin, and also your mucus is important. Provide an environment that's hostile to microbes. So microbes don't want to live there. Secretions give the skin a pH between 3 and 5, which is acidic enough to prevent colonization of many microbes, so we don't get microbes and bacteria growing and colonizing on our skin. Doesn't mean they can't stay there for a while, but they're not going to live and divide and make lots of bacteria there. So you can touch, like the tabletops, which I've been thinking we should clean. We know we're talking about all this. The tabletops probably have lots of bacteria on them. You get bacteria on your hands all the time and stuff. And so, but they're not going to colonize, which means live and divide and make millions of them and so on. And your skin secretions also have proteins called lysozymes, and these are enzymes that will destroy the bacteria by destroying the bacteria's cell walls and therefore killing the bacteria. So that's another external defense. Besides just the physical barrier of your skin being a physical barrier, it also has these secretions as well. All right, so what if your pathogen gets past all of this, which it often does. That's how it gets sick. So then you have some non-specific internal defenses. Internal cellular defenses depend mainly on phagocytosis. We have white blood cells, a group of them called phagocytes, that do this process here, that ingest the microorganisms and initiate inflammation. We're going to talk a little bit later about what inflammation is. So I use this word a couple of times, but we'll get to it in terms of what it actually does. All right, so let's talk about these phagocytic cells. So phagocytes attach to prey via surface receptors and engulf them, forming a vacuole that fuses with a lysosome. So they attach to prey via surface receptors. So phagocytes are cells that engulf a foreign particle. The prey is the pathogen. So it says attached to prey, the prey is the pathogen. Via surface receptors, what does that mean? So let me draw this here. So there are receptors that are complementary between the prey and the phagocyte. And so but we said that this is non-specific. So what this means is that, like, let's say all bacteria have some receptors in common. So no matter what type of bacteria, they all have something in common. And so then there are other receptors that are very specific to specific bacteria. And so this is the non-specific type. So therefore this phagocyte can engulf and destroy any type of bacteria, all right? But it's not going to destroy and engulf our cells because our cells don't have the same receptors as bacteria cells. Does that make sense? Okay, so this is a picture that shows that. So this is, the big purple thing is part of the macrophage. So there's that, and then here's the microbes, and so they're attaching, showing that they're attaching through the surface receptors. And the membrane, so it's showing you here next, the membrane's indenting some more and pinching off, till eventually when it pinches off, you get a vacuole. So the vacuole contains the microbe inside of there. So what does this vacuole do? Naturally inside of our cells we have the organelle called the lysosome. The lysosome, remember, contains digestive enzymes. So what happens next is this lysosome fuses with the vacuole. So this arrow here, these guys fuse together. And so what's the benefit of that is that now it's like one big organelle here where the digestive enzymes can now mix with the microbes. So these enzymes, they mix with, and what are they going to do to the microbe, does it look like? Eat it. Well, they're not really eating it. The enzymes don't eat. What do the enzymes do? Break it down. Mix with and break down the microbes. Which is what we see in the next cell here. So you see all these little dots? This is your digested microbes. So they're micro pieces, if you will. What does it look like is going to happen next? All the digestive microbes are going to be expelled from the cell. So how does it do this? This vacuole here fuses with the membrane and expels it. What is this? This is exocytosis. So right here, I'm going to put here that this is exocytosis. digested microbes are expelled from the cell. So this is non-specific defense because while the microbes have to fit with the surface receptors of the macrophage, it will do this to any type of bacteria versus specific types of bacteria. But it's specific enough that the macrophages aren't going to do this to your own body cells. All right, and so that's that. All right, so these macrophages, which are a type of phagocyte, they can migrate through the body. They move through the body, and they're found in organs of the lymphatic system. And so I'm going to spend just a brief minute talking about the lymphatic system, even though here we are talking about the immune system, because they kind of work together. The lymphatic system has some role in immunity, and so and helps to defend against pathogens. So let's look at this picture here. So this is showing you some organs of the lymphatic system. In green here, you have lymphatic vessels. And so this is a vessel system throughout your body that's different than the other major vessel system throughout your body, which is your circulatory system. All your veins and arteries and so on carry blood throughout your body. Your lymphatic system and all of these vessels carry a fluid called lymph throughout your body. And so what happens is, you've probably heard of lymph nodes, yes, all right, and you've probably heard of the spleen and tonsils and appendix and so on. So let's look at what these things have to do with immunity. So we're going to start here in this picture here. So notice that this arrow is coming from a little lymph vessel here. So this is one of your vessels, and they're enlarging it. And so in my picture, yours is not color-coded, but in my picture, the lymphatic vessels are green. And the capillaries are the smallest blood vessels. So it's showing you the blood capillaries, and then all the circles are your cells. And your cells have fluid in between them. That fluid is called either the extracellular fluid, or another name for that is interstitial fluid. So interstitial fluid is the fluid outside of your cells. And so notice that your cells are not bathed in blood. All the blood is contained in your capillaries. And so your cells are bathed in this interstitial fluid. So let's look at then what happens with the lymphatic vessel. So notice here you have some arrows going into the lymphatic vessel. You have an arrow going in here and an arrow going in here. Where those arrows are coming from is the interstitial fluid. So what occurs here, I'm going to write here, that in this picture, the interstitial fluid enters your lymphatic vessel. Now the thing is, and how this relates to immunity, is that if you are invaded by a pathogen, so let's say a bacteria or virus, that bacteria or virus may be in that interstitial fluid. And so guess what? That pathogen can get into your lymphatic vessels as well. So if a pathogen is present, it will also enter the lymphatic vessel. I'm just going to abbreviate here. So now it's part of this lymph, which is the fluid inside your lymphatic vessel. But the thing is, once that pathogen gets inside, guess what? That lymphatic vessel is connected to all the other vessels that flows throughout your body. So it can move throughout your body. And so notice as it's moving, periodically you have these little bumps here. Those are your lymph nodes. And so you have them in various spots and so on. And so these lymph nodes, let's look at this picture. This is an enlarged lymph node. So you have here arrows coming in. So this is your lymph coming in from the vessels, and it may or may not contain a pathogen. So your lymph may contain pathogen if you have an infection, right? If there was pathogens that were in your interstitial fluid. So what happens is now your pathogens enter your lymph nodes. Now look at what your lymph nodes have inside of them. It says masses of lymphocytes and macrophages. Lymphocytes we'll talk about a little bit later. Those are involved in specific defenses against specific bacteria. Macrophages are your general. These are the ones that just engulf, all right, more generic pathogens. And so the pathogens come in, and the macrophages will begin to ingest them and digest them and destroy your pathogens. And so that's what's going on here. So therefore, usually, you're going to get usually when you get an infection, if you have just one bacteria, it'll quickly multiply and you get lots of them. So let's say you have an infection going on, and all of this bacteria, let's say, keeps on going into your lymph nodes. What will happen is your body will produce more macrophages, and as your macrophages are working to digest all of these pathogens, your lymph nodes will swell up. So you've heard of that, swollen lymph nodes, all right? And so that's why it is a sign of infection. So oftentimes, like doctors will feel right here, like, you know, everybody probably has had that happen before, all right? What they're feeling for, there are lymph nodes that are closer to your skin that you can feel if they're swollen or not. And so that's what they're looking for, because if they are, that's a sign of an infection in your body, because your lymph node, your macrophages and so on are working. And so, so then your lymph leaves the lymph nodes, and so now you've got all this lymph with now with like digested cells, all right, digested bacteria and cell parts and stuff, and so on from your infection. And so then it goes through the rest of your lymphatic system, and what's not on that's not labeled, and I'm not sure why, you have these right here, these two little parts here. These are called your they're thoracic ducts. The CT. What happens is that all this lymph with all of the digested material and so on, what happens is it goes to these ducts, and this is where your lymph enters your bloodstream. Through a vein. And so now all of that debris goes into your bloodstream, and in comes the role of your spleen. Your spleen, I know you don't have a lot of room, so we can put an arrow over here. Your spleen filters the bacteria and debris out of the blood. So that's kind of how that works. And then we have other, like, smaller parts, like your tonsils have some macrophages in them, and your adenoids, the appendix, and these pyropatches in your small intestine are also small areas of lymphatic tissue. Your small intestine is part of your digestive system. That's a major way that something can get into your body, is through your food and stuff into your mouth. So you have some lymphatic tissue in your small intestine. So all of those are also places that have macrophages to help with that. Okay, and that's your lymphatic system. So it also helps with immunity. Alrighty. Second thing with non-specific immunity, besides the macrophages, are the production of what we call antimicrobial proteins. These function in that innate defense in a couple of different ways. By attacking the microbes directly, so they can kill the microbes directly, or impede their reproduction. So let's look at two examples of this. The first one is the complement system. There are 30 different proteins that make up this complement system. And notice it says, which causes lysis of invading cells and helps trigger inflammation. Lysis, the word lysis. Do you remember what that word means? We talked about it when we talked about osmosis. Yeah, we talked about it with the explosion of cells. When we talked about osmosis, we said animal cells don't have a cell wall, and if you put them in a hypotonic solution, that means that the higher concentration of water is on the outside, and water will go in, and remember, animal cells will just keep getting bigger and bigger. They don't have a cell wall to stop that, and then eventually the cell will explode. So lysis means really the kind of poking of holes or destroying that cell membrane. And so that's what this complement system does, is some of our cells in our body produce these proteins that actually destroy invading cells. The key here is the word cells. I'm going to put here an example, our bacteria. And help trigger inflammation. Then we have another kind of molecule called interferons that also provide defense against viruses. So I wanted to point out the difference here. This works against cells, like bacteria are cells. Viruses are not cells. And so, so these guys work, interferons work against viruses. When it says impede their reproduction, that's impeding their reproduction. That's what's happening here. Interferons impede the reproduction of viruses. So they're doing a lot of research in combating viral infections with looking at the interferons that help to just prevent the viruses from reproducing, and actually giving people shots of interferons against that particular virus as a way to combat viral infections. So there's a lot of research being done on that. All right. So that's another thing. So we can destroy them by these macrophages and these phagocytic cells and engulfing them, and we produce these molecules that also can help destroy them. And so we've used, like in this last thing, helps trigger inflammation. Let's look at what inflammation is, because this happens frequently in our first line of defense, the inflammatory response. So in local inflammation, meaning that in one particular area, histamine and other chemicals released from injured cells promote changes in blood vessels. What happens is these changes allow more fluid, more blood to go to the area, which bring with it more phagocytes and antimicrobial proteins that will help to fight off the infection and the damaged tissue. So, so that's what this picture here is showing you. So if we look at this picture from the beginning to the end, so let's look at this first one. We have the injury. So this is your skin. Skin has multiple layers of cells here, and the injury is a pinprick. So on the end of that pin are bacteria. So this is not a sterile pin. So there's bacteria, which is in green here. So that's your pathogen. So you have this injury of cells injured and bacteria inside the body. What happens is chemical signals are released. The chemical signal is histamine. And I'm going to write here down below that what happens is mast cells, called mast cells, we're writing mast cells, release histamine. And notice at the site, you already have a macrophage there. And what's inside of that macrophage? You see that there's already a little vacuole with one of the pathogens in there? So there's already macrophages starting to engulf the bacteria here at the site. So then what happens, so if we look here, here's your capillary. Capillaries are your smallest blood vessel. So in your skin, you've got all these capillaries. The capillaries bring food, glucose for your cells, oxygen for your cells, and take away waste. And so you have the red blood cells, and you have phagocytic cells that can engulf foreign particles. So here's your capillaries. So these mast cells, due to the injured cell and the injury, start producing histamine and releasing histamine, and that's your chemical signal. What that's going to do is trigger what to happen to your blood vessel. What does physically happen to your blood vessel? It is widened. We call that dilation, all right? So if we look at the diameter here, the diameter is much larger in this picture than in this picture. So the first thing that's happened here, I'm going to put A here, is the blood vessel dilation. So this is due to the histamine over here. So that's why when we wrote on the previous page that increases fluid to the cell. So what's happening is that you have increased flow of blood to the cell. Then, what also is leaving the blood vessel? These blood clotting elements. See, we have a damaged tissue here. So these molecules here, you can see from this picture to this picture, will cause a clot to form. All right, so we have here blood clotting elements. I'm going to add one other thing that's not on here, but we just talked about. Another thing that leaves the blood is antimicrobial proteins. And antimicrobial proteins leave the capillary and go to the site. So the antimicrobial proteins are going to start to destroy some of this bacteria by lysing it. So making the membrane, destroying the membrane and killing the bacteria that way. Then as time goes on, and this happens very quickly, so as time goes on, the blood vessel, now what's leaving the blood vessel? Some phagocytic cells. All right, so now we have phagocytic cells. Leave the capillary and go into the damaged tissue where the bacteria are. And what do these guys do? Those are the ones that engulf it and kill the bacteria. So we have the blood clotting elements clotting your blood, antimicrobial elements lysing your cells, and then the phagocytic cells are going to start and help the macrophages engulfing the bacteria. Both of these, with all this stuff coming out, right here, this, we say that that the blood vessel has increased leakiness, that more things come out as a result of this histamine being released. So the capillary, and it only happens at this site. This doesn't happen throughout the body. Quote, leakiness. All right, and then things can leave there. And that's why we often get swelling at the site that this is happening, because you have a whole bunch of stuff coming out of what was normally in your capillaries, out of your capillaries into the site, and so it swells up as a result of it. So if you've ever had a cut and seen it swell around there a little bit, all right, that's what's going on. And then lastly, we get at the very end, the phagocytes now are all engulfing the bacteria, and eventually the tissue heals and your infection goes away. All right, so phagocytes, right, phagocytes engulf the pathogen and the tissue heals. So also this is, so we get swelling. Oftentimes when this is happening, the tissue will appear red, and that's because of the increased blood flow to the area. It also sometimes can feel warm, and that's because blood has a lot of warmth. So swelling, redness, and warmth are a lot of the main symptoms of the inflammatory response. The inflammatory response is a good response because it's you know that your body is trying to get rid of bacteria. And so whenever you see that happening, that tells you that bacteria has entered in through that cut or whatever. Sometimes you can get pus on that, and a lot of people, view that, oh, it's infected, which it is, which means that this is going on. What do you think the pus is?
Is it waste?
It's part of waste. So you have, remember all these phagocytes, when they ingest it, they expel the waste as well. And it's also actually your white blood cells, which are phagocytes also. So your pus is all those white blood cells that have, and the cellular waste that they've destroyed as well. And that's what pus is, all right? So it's kind of gross, but while pus can be an indication of you needed a lot of white blood cells, so it's a deeper, a worse infection. It also is a positive sign that your body is doing the inflammatory response, trying to get to the bottom of that infection and get all the pathogens out. Okay? All right, so that was with bacteria. With viruses, we have these cells called natural killer cells. These guys are cells that we have that attack virus-infected body cells and cancer cells. So these are cells that, cancer cells, remember there's something going wrong with them. And virus-infected cells, how viruses work is that they, when they infect the cells, they basically turn your cell into a virus-producing factory. So one infected cell now of our cells that has been infected by viruses can now make many viruses and release all these viruses that can then go and attack other cells, and then you get more and more virus-infected cells. So therefore, a virus-infected cell, not a good thing. So therefore, these natural killer cells will kill off, what they do is they trigger apoptosis, from last chapter. They trigger apoptosis in the cells that they attack. So the natural killer cells, we'll talk about when a body cell is infected with a virus, it actually takes part of the virus and presents it on the outside of the surface. So you have this receptor that's not yours, it's a virus receptor on it. And that's how your natural killer cells knows, oh, this one's attacked by a virus, this one's not. So the natural killer cell will attack and kill just virus-infected body cells and cancer cells. We are vertebrates. Invertebrates are other animals that do not have a backbone. Many invertebrates defend against infection by many of the same mechanisms that we do in our vertebrate innate response. So going back then, let's go back to that first chart. It's easier for me to just go back this way. That showed you the overview, this one right here. Go back to this for a second. So I want to add something to this chart. When it says innate immunity, I know yours is kind of black here, so you can't really write inside of it. So maybe an arrow up here. I want you to write that innate immunity is found in all animals. All animals have that. So vertebrates, invertebrates, all animals. And then acquired immunity, the arrow up here, this is found only in vertebrates, animals with backbones. Only in vertebrates. So what this is saying here is that we have some relatedness with invertebrates in immunity, in that we have similar innate immunities, but we have additionally acquired immunity. All right, so that's what that slide was saying here. So like insects, and a fly has innate immunity. So flies have external defenses. So a lot of insects have exoskeletons, hard shells on the outside that will serve as a physical external barrier for pathogens. But they also have some of the same internal responses, just not the acquired ones. They don't have specific responses to specific bacteria or specific viruses. All right, so that's your innate immunity. So the rest of the chapter really is looking at acquired immunity, which is, just as the name sounds, immunity that you acquire in your lifetime. Acquired immunity is the body's second major kind of defense. So, new word here, an antigen is a foreign molecule that is recognized by lymphocytes and elicits a response from them. And I'm going to come come back to this, the lymphocytes. Remember, these guys are B and T cells. The lymphocyte recognizes and binds to a small portion of the antigen called an epitope. So let me explain what we have here. And I'm going to actually, I'm going to draw another picture off to the side here that I'm going to have you draw as well that I think brings in the pathogen with an antigen and its epitope together. So what happens is, let's say this is, I'm going to draw a big circle here, and this is your pathogen. So an antigen, which I don't think it does a good job here, an antigen says it's a foreign molecule that's recognized by lymphocytes. And so oftentimes the antigen is on the pathogen. So, and then the antigen has different sites, different shaped sites on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw something on here like this with a pointy and curved. I'm going to draw a couple of those. Pointy, curved, all right, and so on. And so I'm not going to draw anymore. You can have lots of them on the pathogen here. So color coding here, this thing right here, the whole thing is called the antigen. So the antigen is on the surface of your pathogen. And then on top of that, these guys, right here and right here, is your epitope. So what happens is these pathogens have these antigens with these different shaped parts of the molecule called the epitope. And so what happens is these epitopes, when a pathogen comes into your body, these shapes are different than the shapes that are on your cells. And so that's one way that your body recognizes this pathogen as being foreign, is the molecules on the surface here, these antigens that have these binding sites. All right, so we're going to see that certain parts of our immune system are going to recognize these as foreign and can attach and help to fight against this pathogen. But I think I'll wait for tomorrow to build on that. All right, so I'll stop here.